When you hear about the war in Sudan, you probably think it's a civil war, right? Well, what if I told you that's only half the story? That it's actually a secret battleground for regional superpowers fighting for control of one of the world's most critical waterways. To really get what's going on, we have to follow the smoke.
From way up in space, it just looks like a little smudge on the coast. But as you zoom in, that picture becomes terrifyingly clear. You see thick, black smoke just billowing up into the sky. This was the scene over Port Sudan, a city that was supposed to be the one safe place left in a country completely torn apart by war.
You know, this attack completely shattered any idea that the city was neutral. And for a while, nobody claimed responsibility. So the big question is, who attacked Sudan's last safe haven? And maybe more importantly, why? To get to the bottom of that, we have to understand all the players involved, both inside Sudan and out.
Okay, so before this whole thing blew up into an international shadow war, it all started as a really brutal internal fight. And to understand the outside powers, you first have to understand who's fighting on the inside. It's really a tale of two forces. On one side, you've got the Sudanese Armed Forces, or the SAF. This is the official state military. They control the country's east, the government bureaucracy, and, crucially, the Air Force. They have what you'd call formal legitimacy. And on the other side, we have the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF. Now, this is a powerful paramilitary group that actually grew out of the infamous Janjaweed militias from the Darfur conflict. They control the west, the lucrative gold mines, and a lot of key smuggling routes. So they've got the strategic ground and the money. 12 million. Just let that number sink in. That's how many people have been displaced since this power struggle began. It is an absolutely devastating humanitarian catastrophe. And it was all being fueled by a war that was about to get a whole lot more complicated thanks to some powerful friends on the outside.
Because, yeah, this local conflict did not stay local for long. It pretty quickly became a magnet for powerful outside interests, and every single one of them had their own agenda.
And this is what's known as a proxy war. It's a classic setup. You have these big opposing powers who use third parties, in this case the SAF and the RSF, as chess pieces, basically. It's a way for them to fight each other without actually fighting each other directly. You get all the influence without having to occupy a country, all the leverage with none of the liability. So let's look at the UAE's playbook here, because it's pretty ambitious. They've been snapping up strategic ports all around the Red Sea, in Somaliland, Eritrea, Yemen, a real string of pearls. And Port Sudan? That's the final crucial piece of the puzzle for them. If you control that, you have enormous leverage over one of the world's most critical shipping lanes. And this is exactly why they back the RSF, who also conveniently help them get access to Sudan's gold.
But hold on, the UAE isn't playing this game alone. Enter Turkey. They saw what was happening and made their own countermove. They got a 99-year lease on the historic port of Suakin, which is right next door to Port Sudan, to build their own foothold. So when the UAE started arming the RSF, Turkey naturally responded by backing the other side, the official government, the SAF. And just like that, you have a direct geopolitical standoff on Sudanese soil.
Now, this rivalry didn't just bring in money and military advisors. It brought in a whole new kind of weapon that would completely change the way this war was fought. And you can see just how fast things escalated here. In late 2023, the UAE-backed RSF gets its hands on these pretty sophisticated loitering drones. Think of them as unmanned aerial weapons that can just circle over a target before striking. Well, just a few months later, the SAF responds by getting their own advanced Turkish Bayraktar drones. And all of a sudden, this wasn't a war about ground troops anymore. It was being fought from a distance, targeting strategic infrastructure like airports and supply depots.
So here's the bottom line, the crucial point. This war is no longer fully Sudanese. Both sides became completely dependent on their foreign backers for their most powerful weapons. The strategy, the technology, the logistics, it was all being outsourced, one arms deal at a time.
For a while, the foreign powers managed to keep a careful distance, pulling the strings from afar. But that never lasts in a proxy war. Eventually, the proxies collide.
And this is exactly how it all went off the rails, step by step. First, on March 26th, the Turkish-backed SAF scores this huge victory. They retake the capital, Khartoum. Big deal. Then, on May 3rd, a Turkish drone hits a suspected RSF cargo plane. But that plane wasn't just carrying weapons, because the very next day, a massive multi-day retaliatory strike hits Port Sudan, that safe haven we saw burning at the very beginning.
And right there, in that moment, everything changed. That careful distance just collapsed. The proxy war was no longer proxy.
So why? What was the big deal about that drone strike? Well, get this. That Turkish drone didn't just hit some RSF fighters. It killed 4 Emirati officers who were on that plane. Foreign Power A had just killed soldiers from Foreign Power B on someone else's soil.
Which brings us right back to our central mystery. That retaliatory attack on Port Sudan, it's widely believed that it wasn't just an RSF operation. No way. It was planned and executed directly by the UAE. They weren't just hitting Sudanese targets anymore. They were going after Turkish assets, and they even injured members of Turkey's support team. A direct message had been sent.
This direct confrontation has some pretty terrifying implications because this fire is now threatening to spread way beyond Sudan's borders.
And that raises the most critical question of all. Will this fire spread beyond Sudan's borders? Well, the answer is kind of terrifying. Because the dominoes are already starting to fall. The SAF has come out and said that airports in neighboring Chad, which is a key supply hub for the UAE, are now legitimate military targets. New fronts are opening up, with thousands of fighters from Chad's border joining the SAF. And the UAE, they're already scouting new supply routes through the Central African Republic and South Sudan, pulling even more countries into this dangerous orbit.
You know, it all leads to this dangerous paradox, and this thought really sums it up perfectly. The more you try to control a war from afar, the closer it pulls you in. Sudan has become a stark, brutal warning, a place where a hidden war for resources and influence has finally broken out into the open, with consequences we are only just beginning to understand.